Welcome back. And now for the news in detail. US President Donald Trump says he is ramping up the Afghan war after cancelling talks with the Taliban. Talks have been called off after an attack in Kabul that killed an American soldier. President Trump said the US military onslaught on the Taliban is back up at its fiercest in a decade. But Trump said he is still thinking about a drawdown of the 14,000 US soldiers in Afghanistan. He reiterated that peace talks cannot continue after the insurgents claimed responsibility for the last week's attack.
When I heard, very simply, that they killed one of our soldiers and 12 other innocent people, I said, there's no way I'm meeting on that basis. There's no way I'm meeting. They did a mistake. And by the way, they are telling people they made a big mistake.
Meanwhile, U.S. Central Command Head General Kenneth McKenzie said increase in the U.S. military action would be a reply to Taliban attacks. Moving on, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani has called for peace talks and insisted on a ceasefire with the Taliban. Speaking to the military officers in Kabul, Ghani said negotiations without a ceasefire are impossible. Ghani's comments came after the U.S. President called off peace talks with the Taliban over the killing of an American soldier. President Ghani said there are no limits for negotiations, but peace is not unconditional. He said Afghan forces are capable of breaking the Taliban's back. Pakistan has called on the United Nations to settle the worsening human rights situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir. Meeting UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Pakistan's Ambassador Maliha Lodi said a political and humanitarian crisis is raging in the occupied valley. She said India's grave violations in occupied Kashmir are a threat to regional peace and security. Lodi said time has come to speak up for law, justice and human rights of Kashmiri people. UN Secretary General Guterres has expressed concerns over the deteriorating situation in the valley. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi will address the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva today. He will highlight increasing rights abuses by India in occupied Kashmir. Meanwhile, Indian-occupied Kashmir continues to be under lockdown after over a month. A total communications blackout is still in place as the Indian Army patrol deserted roads, making sure the lockdown is enforced. The United Nations has also shown deep concerns over the situation. Details in this report. People are facing serious problems in Indian-occupied Kashmir. They are not even allowed to observe their religious rites any longer. Meanwhile, India has tightened its 6-week-long security clampdown even further. It has banned Ashura processions, which has infuriated locals.
No one is able to speak or raise their voice. They know that the event of Karbala and Ashura is a platform from where Kashmiris can raise their voice. This is an interference into our religious matters. We are against their clampdown.
Kashmiris consider India's latest step a violation of religious freedom.
We are only commemorating Muharram. We are not fighting against anyone. Injustice is happening with Muslims in Kashmir. Forces are brutal with us. We aren't throwing stones, but they are targeting us. They also targeted our religious centers, ransacking them and breaking glass doors and windows.
Meanwhile, Indian forces continue to detain people. The UN has taken notice of the situation, condemning the restrictions imposed by India. North Korea has launched two unidentified projectiles hours after it offered to resume nuclear talks with the US. South Korea's military says the missiles were launched from the South Pyongyang province towards the East Sea. Seoul says its military is monitoring the situation and is ready to stop any acts that can escalate tensions. Today's tests are 8th such launch since July. Earlier, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Pyongyang has not violated any commitments to Washington regarding weapon testing. Meanwhile, North Korea's Vice Foreign Minister Choi Son-hui said a meeting can be held with the US officials to resume the talks. British parliamentarians have rejected a second attempt by Prime Minister Boris Johnson to call snap elections the government fell short by 141 votes required to pass the motion. British Parliament has ordered the government to seek an extension for leaving the European Union if there is no deal by October. Queen Elizabeth has approved legislation against a no-deal Brexit after PM Johnson's failed attempts to pass the bill. Prime Minister Johnson, addressing the Parliament after the results, said he will not delay Brexit any further.
And no matter how many devices this Parliament invents to tie my hands, I will strive, Mr. Speaker, to get an agreement in the national interest.
The 5-week Parliament suspension has begun and it will now reopen on October the 14th. Moving on, Italy's Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte has won a confidence vote in the lower house of the Parliament, confirming his new government's majority. The Parliament supported Conte's government by a majority of 343 out of 630 votes. Before it can be formally instated, Conte and his cabinet must win a similar vote in the Senate today. The PM said he hopes his new cabinet can help build a better Italy and improve ties with the European Union. Conte formed a coalition government with the Five Star Movement and Pro-Europe Democratic Party. French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian says it's too early to lift sanctions imposed against Russia for annexing Crimea from Ukraine. French and the Russian foreign ministers and defense ministers met in Moscow to discuss bilateral ties after 5 years. Speaking to the press, Le Drian said time has come to ease tensions with Russia. He said a prisoner swap between Russia and Ukraine is a positive step. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said progress on rebuilding ties is necessary. Three people have been killed and another seriously injured in a shooting in the Netherlands. Police official claims the gunman was suspected to be a policeman and the incident was a family shooting. Officials say 2 children are among those killed. Hong Kong's leader, Carrie Lam, has warned the United States against interfering in the territory's internal matters. Lam said she deeply regrets interference by foreign parliaments in the Asian financial hub's matters after fresh protests. The chief executive pledged dialogue and asked for further violence to stop just after another weekend of violent clashes. Protesters marched to the U.S. consulate to call on the Congress to pass a bill expressing support for the pro-democracy movement. Lam added that a proposed bill by the U.S. Congress that could strip the city of its trade privileges is unnecessary interference.
To interfere into Hong Kong's internal affairs in terms of what we are doing under the basic law, protection of freedoms and liberties, this is totally unnecessary. Because we ourselves have the obligation and the duty to comply with provisions in the basic law.
Chinese officials have accused foreign forces of trying to hurt Beijing by creating chaos in Hong Kong. Moving on, Egypt says it supports efforts to remove Sudan from the U.S. blacklist of state sponsors of terrorism. Foreign Minister Sami Shukri says Cairo has raised the issue with the U.S. Shukri says Egypt will continue pushing for an end to the sanctions in coordination with the Sudanese authorities. He is in Khartoum to revive relations between the two neighbors. He met Sudan's PM Abdullah Hamdouk, Foreign Minister Asma Abdullah, and Sovereign Council Head General Abdul Fattah al-Burhan. The International Atomic Energy Agency says Iran is moving towards renouncing the 2015 nuclear deal. IAEA has confirmed this after its chief executive, Cornel Farruta, visited Tehran to check Iran's nuclear program's transparency. The UN's nuclear watchdog said installation of advanced centrifuges to produce enriched uranium will lead to increased production. IAEA says Iran will be in breach of the agreement with the major powers if it exceeds uranium enrichment. Meanwhile, Iran says the EU has failed to act on their promises within the 2015 pact. But Tehran says the decision can be reversed if all the parties fulfill their commitments. Saudi Arabia says it wants to enrich uranium in future for its planned nuclear power program. Speaking at a conference in Abu Dhabi, Energy Minister Abdulaziz bin Salman said Saudi Arabia is planning to build 2 nuclear reactors. Prince Abdulaziz says the kingdom wants to diversify its energy mix. Riyadh is expected to issue the tender for the multi-billion-dollar project next year. US, Russian, South Korean, Chinese and the French firms are involved in preliminary talks with the country. Prince Abdulaziz said there will be no radical change in the Saudi oil policy. He says the OPEC Plus alliance will stay for the long term and called upon the members to comply with output targets. The minister said oil production cuts will benefit all exporting nations. A US judge has reinstated a nationwide bar on a rule aimed at blocking asylum applications at the Mexican border. Earlier, a court of appeals narrowed the countrywide bar to the border states of California and Arizona. The Trump administration's rule required migrants who want asylum in the US to first seek safe haven in a third country. The rule was part of President Donald Trump's anti-immigration policy. President Trump has significantly slashed the number of refugees allowed in the US since assuming office in 2017. The administration has capped the number of refugees at 30,000, down from 45,000 last year. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has condemned xenophobic attacks in Johannesburg that claimed 2 lives. The death toll in riots increased to 10 after the latest killings. 1 person was stabbed and another shot dead by a large group of armed attackers. Riot police fired stun grenades and rubber bullets to disperse the crowds, targeting shops. Many shops were set ablaze in the Malvern district. The attack started last week after lorry drivers staged a strike to protest against the employment of foreigners. Muslims around the globe are marking Ashura. The day commemorates the martyrdom of Prophet Muhammad's grandson Imam Hussein in the Battle of Karbala in Iraq. Hundreds of thousands of pilgrims from the world head to Karbala at Imam Hussein's shrine to mark Ashura. The procession routes are dotted with drinking stalls, provide cold drinks and milk to participants and the general public. Globally, Muslims mourn to remember the blockade of water to Imam Hussein's camp after a siege by the enemy forces. Welcome back. Bolivia's ambitious plans to expand its agriculture are facing staunch criticism from the West. President Evo Morales has been accused of burning down forests for monetary gains. More in this report.
Fires are raging in Bolivia, burning through the Chicoitano dry forest in the country's southern Santa Cruz region. Experts say the fires are largely the result of logging to convert forests into farmland. President Evo Morales is promoting land farming in a bid to boost the country's economy.
We are growing economically. I realize I am not an expert, but I have realized that a country without economic growth is invisible in international summits of presidents, in meetings with American business, in Latin America and the world.
Critics link the fires to laws Morales has passed, encouraging farmers and ranchers to settle in forested areas in recent years. Output despite a drought. That includes permission this year to use slash and burn methods to ramp up output despite a drought. Experts say the charm of corporate benefits have corrupted decision makers.
Corporate interests are imposing their ideals on a country that is fighting for the poor. These types of policies do not use a lot of manual labor. They are industrialized and are also linked to transgenics. The intensive use of the earth goes against the policy of defending Mother Earth, against the policy of supporting behavior that is friendly when it comes to natural resources.
Bolivia's fires have swept over 2.1 million hectares of land, burning more than 700,000 hectares of forest in protected reserves. The government has rejected allegations it is fueling the fire, dubbing it a lie to destabilize growth.
While distinct in their practices, most cultures enjoy puppetry. In Indonesia, bamboo puppetry is an art that is slowly dying, but one man's aim is to salvage the craft, modernize it, and feed the masses with local tradition. More on this report.
Nights in West Java are filled with excitement. Handheld puppets donning colorful headdresses and sarongs stage a fight to the rhythm of traditional music. Rajat Skandar has been lending a hand to reviving the near-extinct art of weighing bamboo or bamboo puppetry.
I tried to portray local stories and folklore from our community with bamboo puppets. The end result was really amazing. On top of that, the stories of bamboo puppet we perform are also inspired by current affairs like brawls between students, drug problems, sexual freedom and politics, which are all issues that are widely discussed at the moment.
Skandar learned the art from his father, also a puppeteer. Now he has a full puppet troupe with an orchestra of 12 musicians. He also trains pupils.
In the past, I used to feel embarrassed, but after I learned more and participated in Sundanese arts and cultural performances, I became more enthusiastic about it.
Bookings for Iskandar's shows have steadily increased over the years, which are popular among local audiences.
AI is smarter today than at any time in the past, getting closer and closer to human intelligence. But can it match the brilliance of classical maestros? This idea was recently tested in the Austrian city of Linz when Gustav Mahler's 10th Symphony was put up against music created by a digital software. Austro-Bohemian, later Romantic composer Gustav Mahler was one of the leading conductors of his time. Now, one unusual orchestra performance in Austria has tried to find out if a software can imitate his creative style. The project's creator says the two can be clearly distinguished.
It all sounds like music. It is emotional. But someone who really knows Mahler will notice immediately that it is not him.
But not everyone agrees. Many in the audience said the difference in style between Mahler's compositions and music created by the AI is hardly noticeable.
I really don't feel like a big change, and I believe the orchestra was also really fine and perfect doing in interpretation, so I really enjoy it.
The performance was part of Linz's Ars Electronica festival, which aims to highlight connections between science, art and technology. An open source software called MuseNet was used to compose the artificially created music. At the event's closing, one AI researcher asked if machines are now so smart that they can accomplish great music, or is it the music of renowned composer like Mahler that's overrated? Lows on the highs of the business world now. Jack Ma, the chairman of China's e-commerce giant Alibaba, has stepped down. In an already announced transition, company's current CEO, Daniel Zhang, will replace him as an executive chairman. Jack Ma co-founded Alibaba in 1999, making it one of the biggest online firms globally. Ma will stay on the company's board until his current term expires in 2020. Alibaba is now valued at $480 billion, making Jack Ma one of the richest men in China. He's also the first founder among a generation of prominent Chinese internet entrepreneurs to step down from his company. Nissan's Chief Executive Officer Hiroto Saikawa will step down on 16th of September. This follows accusations of financial irregularities. The company's board of directors made the announcement after a meeting. Nissan's Chief Operating Officer Yoshihiro Yamauchi will take over as acting CEO. Saikawa is suspected of adding $440,000 to his compensation by altering the terms of a bonus. He apologized for a payment last week but denied any wrongdoing. British Airways has cancelled 1,700 flights after its pilots went on a strike over a pay dispute. The strike has disrupted the travel plans of thousands of passengers. This is the first ever pilot strikes in the history of the British Airways. The Airways has offered its pilots an 11.5% raise over 3 years. But the British Airline Pilots Association wants the pay deal to include profit sharing. British Airways Chief Executive Alex Cruz says the strike will punish the customers and the brand.
It's going to punish customers, it's going to punish our brand, it is going to punish the rest of the colleagues. As you mentioned, over 90% they have already accepted the 11.5% deal. And it will also punish those pilots that want to come to work every day at British Airways to make it the best airline in the world.
Asian stocks have traded mixed after Chinese producer prices dropped to their worst contraction in 3 years. Mainland Chinese stocks slipped with the Shanghai Composite down by 0.36%. China's producer price index slid 0.8% from a year earlier. Hong Kong's Hang Seng index was fractionally higher. Japan's Nikkei 225 gained 0.27% along with the surge in shares of automaker Nissan by about 3%. Reeling with the higher trend, South Korea's Kospi also rose 0.41%. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For further updates, stay tuned to Indus News.